In 1868, in a small city called Prien, it's in the lower southwest corner of Turkey, they found an inscription going clear back to the time of Caesar Augustus. It was his birthday. And so they inscribed in this stone really this praise of Caesar Augustus. There's never been a leader like him. There will never be a greater leader than him. Because of him, we have all this great wealth and health. And it was really pretty sycophant praise, if you ask me. But it was the kind of thing that you would see around on stones in cities and pillars on the highway. And in each of these inscriptions of praise, you would read this word, gospel. Good news. The Greek word is actually euangelion. You can probably hear the word in it, evangelism, because it was good news. Now, what's interesting is when we read the Gospels, we think of good news as a religious term, the story of Jesus. Long before it was a religious term, it was a political term, usually of the emperors. Hey, good news, the emperor got married, so we'll have more little baby emperors. Hey, good news, the emperor had a baby, or the emperor had a birthday. We have another year of his wonderful leadership. Or it was of generals, sometimes. If a general came back from war, they would put up these pillars that says, good news, our general won over our enemies. And the general often then became the emperor. You get the idea. Gospel is good news. The first religious person to use the term was Mark. He was probably the first gospel written, and he doesn't take long getting to the term gospel. It's in the very first verse. When Mark says, the beginning of the gospel or good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Now, what makes this so interesting is Mark writes his gospel probably under the leadership of Nero, and definitely in the city of Rome, to a church that was partly Jewish and partly Romans, and they lived in the political epicenter of the world. And Mark takes this political term and he applies it to Jesus. What's really interesting is Mark uses the singular good news, just one good news. Most of the time, when the Romans used good news, it was plural, good newses. Even though there was one emperor, one birth, or one marriage, one victory, there would be others following, and they knew that. So it was the good newses, one in a string of many. But Mark does something different. There's only one good news. The full and final good news of Jesus Christ will end all other good newses. And the way he couches it, remember, in Rome, to Roman Christians, both Jewish and Roman, he talks about Jesus Christ. Now, Christ is a political title of the King of the Jews. We also use the term Messiah, same word. One's in Greek, one's in Hebrew. So they realized that Jesus was being portrayed as the highest ruler over the Jews. The other term, Son of God, that was the term used for emperors, the highest ruler over the Romans. He was a son of a god. And the Romans obviously deified their emperors, and that was blasphemy. But Jesus, by rising from the dead, proved he was indeed the singular Son of God. So here you have the beginning of the gospel, a counter to the political rulers on offer. Jesus is not just king. He is King of kings and Lord of lords. Now, as you fast forward into the epistles, the good news of Jesus, the story of his life, is condensed into one sentence of truth, that Jesus Christ died for our sins and rose for our justification. And that became the gospel, the core of the truth of how you and I can be saved. That is indeed good news. But if you fast forward again to the church of today, the good news or the gospel is translated evangelism, euangelion. And I think we get confused in that term because when we hear you have to answer people's questions. You have to be able to defend the Bible. You have to justify the existence of God or the problem of pain. Look. Evangelism is not that complex. It is simply good news. And whereas it used to be the story of Jesus' life, condensed into a sentence of his death and resurrection, now it is expanded again to the story of your life. And the good news that you need to share is not a defense of the gospel, it's a declaration of your story, how Jesus' life has positively impacted your life. And that becomes the good news that your neighbors, your friends, your family are dying to hear. Because when you share what Jesus has done for you, then that good news of Jesus' story in your story can become their story. So why don't we just all agree this week to share some good news with our neighbors to make Jesus famous?